From I Am Interchange, this is the Hatch podcast series.
It seems now more than ever that we have found ourselves on the cusp of monumental worldwide change. Whether we consider the environment, politics, infrastructure, health, economics, or inequities across a broad swath of social constructs, the consensus is clear and urgent. All is not as it should be. The United Nations, a consortium of 193 member states from around the globe, agrees. In 2015, the UN unanimously adopted the 17 Sustainable Development Goals, the SDGs. These goals call for urgent action in global partnership to secure peace and prosperity for people and the planet, now and into the future. In alignment with these goals, Hatch, a curated network of innovators, artists, activists, and entrepreneurs working together to accelerate positive global change, focuses the annual Summit Impact Labs on topics related to their 4 impact pillars: equity, education, environment, and empowerment. This series will explore those on the front lines of transformational systems change, accelerating solutions for these human challenges, uniting to hatch a better world for all.
I'm Tate Chamberlin, and in this podcast, I'm joined by Marcus Eriksen, scientist and co-founder of the Gyres Institute, a nonprofit and leader in the global movement against plastic pollution. Eriksen and his wife, Gyres co-founder Anna Cummins, have manned the Institute's helm since 2009, leading 19 expeditions throughout the world's waters with scientists, stakeholders, and innovators researching the detrimental reach and impact of plastics and inspiring change. Here, Eriksen discusses the true nature of the plastics beast and the work of dismantling the systems and misconceptions that have allowed its reign. Welcome, everybody. This is Tate Chamberlin. We are here up at the Hatch Summit in Montana. We're partnered up with them for this week's worth of action labs fused with the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. I've got Marcus Eriksen. Is there a book that really has transformed how you think about systems change or disrupting systems?
The person that comes to mind is Biophilia, a book by E.O. Wilson. Really transformative. It's about the relationship between humans and nature and life-like systems.
Biophilia, like being scared of, like how humans separate themselves from...
That's one of 9 typologies, negativistic, like an innate fear of snakes and caves and things of that nature and spiders. Then there's a whole other set of typologies, moralistic, humanistic. I studied aesthetic biophilia, how we look at our visual field. We need nature around us. It's very healing. So that's going back 25 years for me. Reading that book, published in 1984, very transformative in how I see the world and relationship to it.
Great. What keeps you up at night?
Thinking about the time, how much time we have, how much time I have, thinking of mortality, thinking of our species in that same context. I have a daughter, and I realize that if she lives a nice long life, lives to be 88, she will see next century. And what's going to unfold in this time? I witnessed in my, short 54 years, population double. And the resource scarcity, the pollution of overpopulation, all of that coming to a head. So that's what keeps me up. Really, I spend a lot of time, maybe too much time, thinking about those existential crises that bubble to the surface.
So you just answered what keeps you up at night, and your answer was kind of close to your heart, your daughter.
My daughter and time, how much time I have left to be of service to her generation, and how much time she will be here. And as I mentioned, a long life she lives, she'll see next century. As an older woman at the end of her life, what's going to happen in that time, and what can I do the time I have so that she doesn't suffer and her generation doesn't suffer? I mentioned, in my lifetime, I've seen population double. I study ocean plastics. I've seen the oceans. I've seen plastic trash in the most remote parts of the planet. And my sort of interest in this began, going back to when I was really young. I was in the Marines right out of high school. And I found myself in 1991 in the first Gulf War. If you remember the burning oil wells in the desert around Kuwait City?
I do.
I was a young Marine. I was there, covered in oil, sitting in a a hole in the sand and thinking, what are we doing? We have mustered the greatest military in the world to rescue the richest country on the planet. And then 3 years later, we did nothing in Rwanda, this catastrophic genocide. And it just got my mind thinking. And I went down a spiral for a decade. And I remember sitting in that desert and thinking to myself, if I survive this, sitting in a hole in the sand, and there was another Marine next to me. He was from Louisiana, from New Orleans, like me. And we're thinking, if we survive this, let's raft the Mississippi River. And 13 years later, I couldn't find him. And 13 years later, I just finished grad school. I had no home, no car, I had no girlfriend. I had nothing, but I had this memory. And I built my raft. I got dropped off in Lake Itasca, Minnesota, and I spent 5 months rafting the Mississippi River. And
by yourself because you couldn't find him?
Right. I
is he
tried
alive? Have you ever been in touch with him?
I ended up finding him. He's a Border Patrol agent in Texas, El Paso.
So rafting.
Years later. So I rafted the Mississippi River, and what I saw, what I had lost in that time, was the connection to nature, that innate need to be in natural settings, and a lot of pessimism around people, that we are destined to destroy ourselves. And what I found on the river, everyone was willing to help. When you see someone one-on-one, there is this basic goodness. It's a Buddhist principle, basic goodness that we all have. And that came back in droves. So many people helped me. I remember one time I heard a bunch of shotgun blasts in Arkansas. I pulled over with my raft, jumped out. There's 3 kids shooting bottles. And here I come out. I look like Grizzly Adams. I just get this long beard, all dirty. And they end up laughing. I was laughing. I said, where's the next boat launch? I go there, pitch my tent. 9 o'clock at night, there were headlights in my tent. And I'm like, who in the world is this? And I was kind of disturbed because it woke me up. Same 3 kids with like 4 plates of food. It was Thanksgiving that day. Huh. The basic goodness of people.
They brought you food.
They brought me food.
Thanksgiving.
Just wanted to feed someone that probably scared the bejesus out of them a few hours earlier. And then my connection to nature. Every night I camped on the bank of the river. I saw Aurora Borealis in Memphis, Tennessee.
Oh, wow. That's pretty low.
It was. But there was, I had deer jumping over. I saw a bear. I watched a bald eagle catch a walleye right in front of my raft. So I fell in love with the river. And then when I saw trash, I saw so much plastic trash. But by then, I'd fallen in love with the river. I really did. When I go back to New Orleans, I often go to the river and I just touch the river and just say hi to an old friend. It's a phenomenal relationship. And when I see trash, it's like someone has hurt your family. It's like, this is not okay. And that's when I met Captain Charles Moore, the man that found the Great Pacific Garbage Patch. I met him in Long Beach, California. Within a few weeks, I was his director of research education and did that for a few years. He took me out to go see the garbage patch in the North Pacific.
It's a legal country now, isn't it? Did they make it?
There was an art project that did that gave it its own identity.
Yeah.
But it isn't a consolidated patch. There's so much misinformation. And that's when my career in science really took off. So I met Anna Cummins, my wife today. We began the 5 Gyres Institute because there's some basic unanswered questions. Everyone thought there was this mythical island of trash. And it's just not so. When you're out there, you just see blue water, and occasionally you'll see a fishing buoy or a tangled ball of netting. But when you look very closely, when the waters slow down and the waves stop and the ocean takes on this mirror finish, it's beautiful. Then this kaleidoscope of microplastics come to the surface. And that was everywhere we looked. So some basic unanswered questions were, where is the plastic in the world? How much is out there? And what's the impact? Now, at this point, media sensationalism had blown up this mythical island, and so we were having to deal with that misinformation. But it was much worse than that. This microplastic is pervasive, and I've now, with my wife and our team, we've conducted about 20 expeditions equivalent to sailing around the planet twice. We published more than 24 research papers on the subject. We've informed governments and corporations and politicians and many NGOs. For example, plastic microbeads in the Great Lakes, that was our paper. We authored that paper, the first description describing microbeads in the environment. And these things lead to policy. They lead to good decision-making. Basic science literacy is essential to healthy democracy and for us to survive the rest of this century. So the 5 Gyres Institute did answer those questions. We published a paper on the abundance, how much is in the world's oceans, 5.25 trillion particles, 250,000 tons.
Wow.
I just published a paper last year on plastic bags and camels in Dubai. Not just our oceans, it's around the world. So really trying to understand the problem. We're there now. We know enough to act. Now it's really working with the change makers. This is why I love coming to Hatch, is that you've got people, you put them together, you've got leaders of nonprofit organizations, of companies, you've got artists, they all come together with the same intention to see what is the world we want, what's the better world that we can envision and create. Having done the science on plastic pollution, now it's finding those change makers and saying, how do we get there where we want to be? When I was here 2 years ago at Hatch, in the same beautiful place, I remember working with Kimberly-Clark, a big plastic producer, plastic packaging. And it was an engineer from Kimberly-Clark that was here that understood the science, had read some of the papers I'd published. We had the most amazing conversation, and it led to an amazing collaboration over the last 2 years, doing research together. So at this point, it's about working with corporations, with governments to pass the right kinds of policies that level the playing field for all companies. Find those companies that want to do good, that want to innovate, that want to take the leap of faith and try something new, working with them, and the many artists out in the world that can communicate things in a way that my research paper and a very text-dense abstract can't. So that's why I love being here. It gets those people together to envision that better world.
Yeah, that's such a long trajectory that you just went through. So you were, a long time ago, you were in the military and in Iraq, first go around Desert Storm, and then to Rwanda, wondering what we were doing there, seeing all the turmoil in the world. Then it came down to kind of a rafting trip where you found peace with Mother Nature and it became a friend, but you noticed how dirty it was and it kind of transcended you to this big plastic cleanup effort.
Yeah, a lot of miles on land and sea and down rivers for more and peace.
Yeah, a lot of Hatch is built around systems change. What system would you define as that you are changing with this?
Envisioning the world that we want. If I had to zero in on one thing that gives you the biggest bang for the buck, it's the reusable economy, where we can design waste out of the system. For example, there's a company called Repack that's making a reusable mailer that hopefully UPS, FedEx, Amazon will use. There's a company called Vessel. They go into an entire city, get every restaurant, every coffee shop to honor the same cup and mug, and it just circulates. Everyone washes it and gives it back to the customer. There are all these reuse systems where you can design waste out of it. Because you think about the amount of waste that we create in so many sectors. And that's one thing I'm here in Hatch to really do a deep dive on with the amazing brain trust that's here is I've been to so many conferences where you've got people in the room where their focus is plastics and textiles. And, okay, what's the polymer? Well, it's polyester. And it's clothing. And over next to me in the same table, well, I'm working on medical waste. And across the table, I'm working on car tires. And it's different chemistry. It's different uses of those materials in society, different ways that they enter the environment, different kinds of harm they cause to ecosystems and to social systems, and therefore very different solutions. So what's needed is to deconstruct that complexity, break it down into sectors. Because I can tell you so many plastic pollution conferences I've been to, they all ask, well, what's happening in the oceans? And I have to say, well, it's global. It's all these different systems that are leaking pollutions to all kinds of environments. You deconstruct that and zero in and focus on each one independently. That's how we solved the hole in the ozone layer, for example. It was CFCs. We were able to ban that chemical globally. Smog over cities. We focused in emissions controls. Tar floating on the ocean surface. We zeroed in on oil tankers that were washing out sludge from their ships at sea. So it's really narrowing it down to that what is that focus that we want? That sector of use of the material in society that we can then transform that system. It's too complex now. It's confusing policymakers.
Yeah, I agree. I've been part of the Media for Social Impact Summit that the United Nations has to help communicate the Sustainable Development Goals. And there are so many goals, and within them are thousands of little projects because it's overwhelming, and trying to figure out a focus to get there without it being overwhelming is very, very difficult. And so you're kind of honing in on that.
It's very overwhelming. I remember I was at the UN talk about SDG 14, and it's like you peel an onion and just
Is that life underwater?
Yes, it gets so complicated very quickly. And there's so many projects. Like the whole spectrum, you've got the folks who are trying to bring in the reuse economy, which are actually most NGOs and environmental social justice NGOs around the world. Then the folks focused on cleanup, because that's where industry wants to put the money. Oh, just deal with it over there after it's a problem. And
so preventative, and then there's after the fact.
Yes. Yeah. There's preventative versus the whole post-consumer cleanup stuff, which is the knee-jerk reaction most people have. Now, it's my experience, 15 years ago getting involved in this. People would say, trash in the oceans? Well, go get it. And so some organizations that focused on going to get it, they raked in the bucks. While the ones who are saying, look, a preventative strategy is the long-term strategy. There's precedent for how it works, and we can get there. But it's constant pressure over time to get those systems to flip. So that's the challenge I've seen. Working on SDG 14, there's such a gamut of entities working on it in different ways. Some, I think, become distractions from the ones that are proven to work in the long term, the preventative ones.
Do you have a personal theory for systems change?
I think what I just mentioned, constant pressure over time.
Constant pressure over time.
Constant pressure over time, never giving up. For example, in California, the plastic bag ban, it was the first state to adopt the plastic bag ban. It took 10 years. And it was after so many environmental NGOs and social justice organizations and companies making alternative bags all working together. It took us 10 years to get 100 cities to ban the bag. And then at that time, Governor Brown said, okay, I hear you. We're going to ban the bag. First state. And I can tell you, industry, they were very savvy. They began trying to pass preemptive bills in other states, which made it impossible, virtually impossible for cities to ban plastics. It had to come from the state level first.
Which prevented the patchwork to build that momentum.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's a very manipulative, very intelligent strategy. I would say it worked in the beginning, but now we're on to them.
What's the most challenging piece about your work right now?
I think unraveling misconceptions. Well, the initial one I mentioned was the Great Pacific Garbage Patch, this island of trash. The image of a consolidated island, everyone just said, well, just go get it. It's not that at all. It's trillions of little salt and pepper flakes of microplastics that each is absorbing toxins, entering the food chain. The cleanup of that is nearly impossible. That will have to become sediment and sink and be sequestered in the earth. That's the end game for that. Another big misconception is the myth of recycling. And that's been going on since the 1970s. If you recall the Crying Indian campaigns, Keep America Beautiful. So the Crying Indian campaign, it was a Native American, actually it was an Italian actor named Iron Eyes Cody. And he wore a headdress in a canoe, paddles across a river, and he's picking up trash, and a tear rolls down his cheek. That was funded by Keep America Beautiful. That was funded by Anheuser-Busch, Philip Morris, Coca-Cola, and PepsiCo. And the intention was to take the heat off of industry, because a lot of NGOs were saying, the entire environmental movement of the 60s and 70s was saying corporations have to take some responsibility. They were very effectively able to say, nope, it's the consumer. Don't pollute. Give a hoot, don't pollute. Remember the little owl?
Yeah, they would put the pressure onto the consumer as opposed to taking it on themselves.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that's still a myth we have to deal with today. Totally. Everyone just says, well, I recycle. Well, it's much more, thank you, but it's much more complicated than that.
Kind of gaslighting. I want to go back to the island. I think I remember the campaign that made people think it was an island. There was an effort to get funding to remove it at the UN level. There's a function in the UN to get funded, you have to be a legitimate country. And so there was an effort and a campaign to make the Isle of Trash. And people got passports, like Matt Damon got a passport and all of this. And so they made it an actual country to get funding from the UN to do something about it. Was there
a president?
Yeah, no, they had like they built like...
Had a governmental structure and everything.
And I wonder if that had something to do with the misconception of it being like this solid thing.
It may have exacerbated the misconception.
What's the most interesting idea in your field?
It's the examples of the reuse economy. And I think looking at biomaterials, when I say the reuse economy, you think of two systems that materials flow through society. There are technical materials, and there is recycling. There's also reuse. refurbishing. There's capturing those material flows before they go to the incinerator or the dump. And there's the biological materials that they're made by nature, they can go back to nature. And what we're seeing is there's some innovations out there. Like right now, the last 5 years of my career, I've been so marveled by some of the innovations out there. One company comes to mind called Ecovative. They are able to take sawdust, inoculate that with mycelium, and they can make blocks to create packaging. They have a huge contract they acquired from IKEA to replace their packaging with this mushroom blocks.
That's big.
And when it's done, you just throw it in your compost. It's excellent compost. It's wood chips and mycelium, replacing styrofoam, polystyrene. So I think that I'm always looking at the innovators and the young entrepreneurs and seeing how can we amplify their voice so they can grab market share and replace the status quo that has created mountains of trash worldwide.
We're up at Hatch right now, and you're one of 7 impact labs that are happening. What are some of the key steps that you're hoping to accomplish with the people who will be attending your lab here?
So for a long time, plastic pollution has been one thing, plastic. But when you think about what plastic is, it is thousands of chemicals used in thousands of ways. So what we want to do here is deconstruct the complexity of a plastic so we can really zero in. And I mentioned, some examples of that. When I'm in the ocean, and I've done many expeditions, over 20 expeditions around the world, sailing the Arctic, Antarctic, all 5 subtropical gyres, the Bay of Bengal, the Great Lakes, what we typically find is fishing gear. Fishing gear, that's the sector of use, maritime activities, and there's some single-use plastics, especially near coastlines. Things come down rivers, but we found with our coastal modeling, the way ocean currents move, most of what leaves rivers, 75% to 80%, it gets pushed back on land. So it's in the middle of the ocean is mostly fishing gear. So there needs to be a conference that's fishing gear focused. So many times I go to a conference on plastic pollution, there's someone that's working on car tires or single-use plastics and textiles and automotive e-waste, and then there's one person on fishing gear. That's a huge industry. That needs to have its own brain trust that's focused on what are the innovative materials, new systems, what are the policies that will work, what are the systems that need to be changed in that one sector. So here at Hatch, what I'm hoping is that we have about 13 sectors that we've defined, and I would like some help from the attendees here to really think through, are these the best 13? Are there more? Should we lump or split these? And then talk through what are some of the, some ideas about what the systems change might be. What are things that some of the Hatchers here have heard that we can follow up on? So really asking the Hatch family here to help us deconstruct the plastic pollution issue into sectors of use in society so we can zero in and find the right solutions that will change those systems per sector.
Can you tell me a little bit about heroes who have kind of impacted your trajectory? Are there a couple or a single person or idea that stands out as a hero to you?
When I think of people, I think of mentors. Captain Charles Moore, the man that found the Great Pacific Garbage Patch, most recent one. Before that, an undergraduate, Dr. Craig Dursler, paleontologist. I have a side gig every summer. I go dig dinosaurs in Wyoming. Not too far from Montana where we are now.
Fun, yeah. There's a lot of dinosaur activity there.
We were working on our 8th Triceratops in Lusk, Wyoming just about 2 months ago. So it's a little side gig. It's a whole different environment, the desert than the ocean. So I love the transition, and very different from LA. It's the least populated county. The entire county has 2,400 people.
Yeah.
It's phenomenal. It's been scientists that have really inspired me. E.O. Wilson, I've never met him, but I've read almost all of his books. Biophilia is the one that really transformed my thinking.
He was the author of Biophilia.
Yes. Yeah.
That's why we were pairing the two of you together, because the kind of regenerative thinking, your book kind of tied it together itself with the biophilia, kind of reconnecting humanity to more organic, and we're all part of this ecosystem.
Yes, like really understanding, a deep understanding of our relationship to nature. That's what brought me to be so passionate of this plastic pollution issue. I fell in love with the river. That naturalistic, moralistic biophilia. There were 2 of 9 typologies that E.O. Wilson created. Someone else who inspires me is my wife and daughter. She and I complement each other so well. We run the 5 Gyres Institute together along with an amazing team. Lisa Ertl, a young scientist from the University of Toronto. She's a spitfire. She knows the science so well. And Anna is our executive director. She networks with people. I play in the ocean.
Good.
I play with trash.
Yeah. Sounds like an adventure, though.
It is. It is. We've had a chance to sail around the world and bring some really amazing people with us in these 20-plus expeditions. Well over probably more than 400 people have gone sailing with us. Many have gone on to spawn their own organizations. Crystal Ambrose, for example, a young woman from the Bahamas, she began her own organization. She was in her late teens when she sailed us for the first time. And now she and her team were able to get Bahamas to ban plastic bottles.
You reminded me of the Soul Buffalo.
Yes, Dave Ford. I've sailed with Dave. Another phenomenal connector and great human being.
Do you have a vessel that you have that has kind of been your own imagination for this? Does it have a name?
Junk. So after I did the river trip, I made my own homemade raft. And I remember when I first met Anna, we actually both joined Captain Charles Moore in the Great Pacific Garbage Patch together. And I caught her sleeping on top of the sails on Valentine's Day. So I scooped up some trash out of the ocean, a piece of fishing net. I made a ring, and I proposed. And she said yes. And I said, you don't have to answer now. You can wait in the middle of the ocean, But she said yes. And then later I said, but I want to build a mega raft. And she was on board. So she and we built a giant ocean-going raft. It was about 20 feet by 24 feet, 15,000 plastic bottles. We floated a Cessna 310 aircraft on top of the bottles. We wrapped the bottles in old fishing nets. We took 24 broken sailboat masts, made a square deck, and a piece of broken sail just made a sail. No motor, no support vessel. And then I got a friend of mine, Joel Pascal. So he and I were the sailors. Anna was organizing everything. Again, she's an amazing networker. She was on land, giving me weather reports, telling me where the hurricanes were. Joel's an amazing sailor. And we thought it might take us 3 or 4 weeks on our little raft. It took us 13 weeks to get from Los Angeles to Hawaii.
You went all the way to Hawaii on a homemade raft?
3 months.
Was it flat or did it have like a hull shape?
It had no keel. I wish it did.
Yeah, you probably had a lot of drift.
It was the worst sailing vessel on the planet. So the first 3 weeks, we just went south.
Yeah.
We didn't cross a single line of longitude. We almost changed our mind, said, let's just tell the world we're going to Acapulco. This is not working. And then we got
drift sideways.
It does. It did. We ended up taking, we had a couple of broken keels, rudders, that we used as a dagger board, right in the center, trying to slow down that sideways drift. We hit 22 degrees north, and the boat went 90 degrees, turned toward Hawaii, turned west, and it was just west the next 2 months.
Wow, because you had put a centerboard in it.
Yeah.
I love sailing.
But also the wind just took us in that direction. It was nonstop. Those prevailing winds just kept us going. Phenomenal experience. And like on the river, I saw the most, I remember one night, 2 o'clock in the morning. So my watch was 1 a.m. until 9 a.m. And Joel would have, the early evening. And at 2 a.m., the squall comes through. And I knew when I looked behind me, I knew exactly if there's a storm at this angle behind me, that's going to get me. And it did. And it hit me it was fierce. I mean, I was soaked to the bone. The raft spun around to drop the sail. And I threw the sail back up. It was over in 20 minutes. A squall was come and go really fast. Mm-hmm. Threw the sail back up, and I'm just soaked. Joel was still sleeping. He didn't wake up at all.
He slept through it?
He's like, he'll deal with it. He was probably awake. He was like, I don't want to deal with this.
I'm not
going to deal with it. And I sat back in the chair, and my chair was it was the best decision I made. I pulled the seat out of my Ford Econoline van, and that was the most comfortable seat. Otherwise, I'd be sitting on 5-gallon buckets for 3 months. I'm sitting in the seat, and the squall's now in front of me, and the moon's behind me, and a rainbow forms, but it's in shades of gray.
So it was in the evening, in the middle of the night?
2 a.m.
During your shift?
2 a.m.
And you could see a rainbow off of the moonlight?
But it was shades of gray. Oof. It was this moon bow. It almost brought tears to my eyes. It was so beautiful. Then I would hit these things in the ocean, and the bioluminescence would just explode. I watched mahi-mahi chase flying fish while frigate birds would hover above, waiting to catch one in midair. Just phenomenal experiences that I've never experienced before or since. Things that you have to be at sea for months to have a chance to see.
Wow.
And it deepens your love for nature, being in nature. There's a difference between rafting and sailing. I think when you sail, you're out to conquer the ocean. When you're rafting, you submit, you surrender.
Yeah.
I remember another funny story. So 3 weeks into this voyage, we hadn't crossed a line of longitude. And I remember I had a satellite phone, and I called Anna, and I said, look, I don't know if we're going to make it to Hawaii. I'm not sure I'm going to make it. So after that call, it was pretty sobering and sad. I had a wine bottle, and I made a little note, little message, put it in there, and I don't know where I got the wax from. Just sealed this thing really good, threw in the ocean. It was just a love letter, like a goodbye.
Message in a bottle.
I'm almost going to tear up now. I mean, it was pretty powerful moment. I threw it in there. 8 years later, I get a letter, and it's a woman and her husband and son. They found the bottle.
No.
In Guam, 6,000 miles away. And she sent me back. We have it framed on our wall, the love letter I sent, and then her letter saying, "We found your bottle."
Oh,
it's just
what a
cool.
cool
really
story.
Cool. It's a treasure for our family.
Wow. We used to, when I was in grade school, we would write a letter and put it in a balloon and let them go. It's not very eco-responsible, but
No.
it was the 90s.
Not at all.
And we would see who would write back to us. Do you have an ask for anyone who's listening right now?
Get organized. Find out where your heart is, where your passions are about the good of humanity, the good of the environment, and get organized. I often get the question, what should people do? What should I do? And I usually say, no, it's good policy. It's our government leaders to pass good policy. It's up to corporations to take responsibility for the end life of the things they make. But for the ask to the individual, it's get organized. When you work together, it's so much more powerful. I'm amazed our organization, our small team of 10 people, we've had the privilege of working with other organizations to pass national policy. We're now working with the UN on a UN treaty on plastic pollution. And it's getting organized. Now, there's a big organization called Break Free from Plastic, which is an assembly of thousands of organizations worldwide. And they're challenging the status quo in a huge way. They're challenging not just plastic, but also big oil and the increase in refineries that are shifting away from fossil fuels, increasing the plastic they produce. So I urge everyone just to find your passion and find your like-minded citizens and get organized.
What brings you hope?
My first thought is my daughter, but I keep saying my daughter, but she does in her generation.
I think that is a great answer. I think a lot of people relate to people who are, right in front of them.
She has that. I think we all have basic goodness growing up. We're good people when we're young, and that kind of gets taken out of us. The love of nature gets taken out of us. I don't know how many kids I've met. I lived in L.A., Los Angeles for 25 years. I met so many kids that live 5 miles from the ocean, 8, 10 years old, have never seen the ocean. They're terrified of squirrels and pigeons, or their bare feet touching grass. And it has a term, nature deficit disorder. We take that out of them. Kids naturally have that love of nature and love of each other. Other thing that inspires me are the young entrepreneurs and innovators I meet. There's so much creativity in the world today. That's why I love Hatch. When I was here 2 years ago, I met so many people that had ideas I couldn't even think were thinkable. It was pretty amazing.
It's one thing I love about Hatch too. You can be talking to one superhuman, and then you turn to your left, and then there's another one, and then it's like, what surprise are you gonna blow my mind with today?
It's humbling.
Yeah, we're up at Hatch a Better World right now, and this is the 25th year of Hatch happening. I Am Interchange teamed up with Hatch this year around 7 of their labs that revolve around the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. We've got Marcus Eriksen and 5 Gyres. And thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate having you here and sharing with us.
It's my pleasure. I enjoy the conversation. Good to be back at Hatch.
What happens if humans become a keystone of regeneration of our ecosystem rather than collapse? As Eriksen iterates, the opportunity is at our fingertips. As he contemplates the future for the planet and for his young daughter, he is plagued by existential questions. What will she see? How much time is left? And yet, when these worries overwhelm, he returns to what he knows, a Buddhist principle solidified by a group of generous young boys on the banks of the Mississippi. There's basic goodness in everyone. And information is a powerful instigator of systems change. There's currently an estimated 250,000 tons of microplastics in the ocean. And contrary to the pervasive misconception about some solid floating mass that can be easily remediated, the pieces are too small and widespread to simply be cleaned up. But after a decade of research and cooperation with leading scientists and innovators across reusable economy paradigms and systems change efforts, Eriksen sees hope on the horizon, and it's doable. We need to work with corporations and governments to pass progressive policy to design waste out of our systems. We need to arm young artists and entrepreneurs with information to envision and create. We need to reconnect, to fall in love with nature again, and define our passions around humanity and the environment, and organize. We need to apply constant pressure over time and never give up. A shout out to our media and production team: Jessica Byerly, Allison Gregory, Kevin Hilton, Roy Chapman, Eli Kisko, Raymond Onsatagi, Sean Mackinson, Robert Edwards, and Mark Groner. A special thanks to Yarrow Craner, Jared Silverman, Pete Strom, Josie Caton, Eitan Shapira, Cassidy Seckman, Bryant Stersala, Rachel Hicks, Katie Yam, and Lou Morris. With so much gratitude to the Hatch supporters, Steelcase, the Kauffman Foundation, the Gwydion Fund, Envision Equality, the Hatch volunteers, board of directors, Hatch guardians, and the community who help make this work and mission possible. To learn more about Hatch, visit hatchexperience.org. Building community could not happen without food. And with that, I'd like to thank Whistle Pig Korean, Red Tractor Pizza, and Zocalo Coffee House. Do you have an issue that's riddled by gridlock in your community? Shoot me an email at tate@iaminterchange.org. That's tate@iaminterchange.org. Remember, share airtime and don't ruin dinner.